Hello everyone, welcome back to the Horror Basement. My name's Shane, and today we're talking about Lucio Fulci's The New York Ripper from 1982. Now, Lucio Fulci is an Italian horror director who is famous for contributions to the horror and giallo genre. Now, if you haven't heard of that, a giallo, which translates to yellow in Italian, is a genre of crime, thriller, and mystery movies which were based on popular pulp novels of the time. And many giallo directors like Fulci and Dario Argento went on to inspire the horror boom of the 80s. And arguably, the giallo films of the 70s kind of laid the groundwork for the slasher genre of the 80s in the United States. Now, the New York Ripper is an interesting blending of the two styles because while it is a straight up slasher, it also employs the murder mystery plot that you see in many early slashers that are borrowing from the giallo style. Movies like the first Friday the 13th and My Bloody Valentine, where we don't see the killer until the end of the movie, and all of the murder and killing is shown from the first person POV of the killer to keep their identity a mystery. It would be later in the 80s once the horror icons, the slasher characters, became front and center, and the subtext of a real murder or crime element was dropped. Now, the killer in the New York Ripper is interesting for two reasons. One, he is unmasked walking the streets of a skeezy late 70s, early 80s New York, going after specifically young women who are sexually active or promiscuous in the eyes of the killer. And secondly, he does all of his talking in a funny Donald Duck type duck voice, which you would think would be silly, but when you're seeing someone brandish a knife at a young lady, and I can't do the voice, but he sounds like Donald Duck, it's more unnerving than you would think it would be. And that sexual element that of the killer really permeates this entire movie because the two things that the New York Ripper has in spades is sex and gore. Pretty much most of the women that end up getting murdered in this movie have protracted sex or nude scenes prior to their being killed. And once the slashing, as per the name of the genre, begins, the camera unflinchingly stays with the action. You can tell that Fulci and his team spent a lot of money on these rubber torsos and spent a lot of money filling these rubber torsos with blood, and they are going to get all of their money's worth. At one point towards the end of the film, a woman's nipple gets sliced in half, and the camera does not cut away. The entire time you see the blade enter and then just drags through the middle of the nipple. So if you aren't comfortable with either the depictions of sexual violence or violence of any kind shown explicitly, you might want to avoid this one. And the sexual element brings us to one of the most hard to describe scenes I've ever seen in a horror movie, where one of the future victims, I didn't write down her name, unfortunately, but she is the wife of a rich person, but she goes out at night into the streets of New York looking for sexual kicks, and she goes to this bar where she's accosted by two gentlemen, one of them being Silvertoes Morales. And Silvertoes Morales surmises that this woman is only wearing lingerie underneath her trench coat, and then proceeds to manually stimulate the woman specifically with his toes. So while there's no explicit nudity in this scene, which goes on for multiple minutes, there is a guy just rubbing his feet on the crotch of a woman as she... And the one thing that makes the scene even more uncomfortable than the guy's gross feet is that the consent is very dubious. It's not clear if the woman is enjoying this or not, or if she's okay with this or not. And that's left completely up in the air. So a scene that wouldn't be made today, and probably for the best. But towards the middle of the movie, we meet our two young college student characters when Faye is attacked and her boyfriend, Peter, visits her in the hospital. So thus far in the movie, our two detective characters, Lieutenant Fred and Dr. Davis, who is the Lieutenant Fred being the hard scrabble, tough as nails detective, and Dr. Davis being the aloof intellectual academic. They only have one suspect so far, who is a very large man who is missing 2 fingers, and is very clearly a red herring, as this guy is very, very pro-sex, while the killer seems to be very anti-sex. And the pro-sex guy, the Greek, the large man with the missing fingers, attacks Faye, but she gets away, and her boyfriend, Peter, shows up to comfort her. And thus far, other than the investigators, the killer, and the victims, and the obvious red herring, Faye and Peter are really the only characters we meet. So we obviously, as an audience, understand that Peter is going to be the killer. We just have to get through a bunch of more sex and stabbing to get there. So in the end, we learn that Peter, surprise, is the killer, and he is taking his rage out on sexually promiscuous women of New York City because he feels guilt because he has abandoned his own daughter, who is laying in a hospital dying of cancer, and he will call her in the hospital and read to her a book that she likes in the duck voice that he uses when he's killing. And he is sad because his daughter will never get a chance to grow up and experience womanhood or sexuality. So he takes out his rage on those who get to live the life that his daughter never would. So it's not bad enough that Fulci has given us an 80 minutes of non-stop sex and stabbing, but then right as the killer is gunned down, we throw in this backstory that involves a cute little girl lying in a hospital bed dying of cancer. That being said, despite all that I've said about this movie thus far, it is a very wild ride, and I did actually enjoy it. It's an interesting time capsule into what New York looked like in the late 70s, early 80s. And if you can get around the sexist stuff that hasn't aged well and just enjoy the movie for its like gritty hyper-realism, I think you'll really enjoy this. That being said, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Leave a like, hit the subscribe button for more, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you.